Your filmmaker, Daria Price. So, as Jackie said, a fascinating detective story, a mystery story, and a true crime. True crime. So, just for the basics on the filmmaking, what put you onto this? When did you start putting this together?
So I had first noticed an article really early on in the Times, actually by Patricia Cohen, and I thought it was kind of curious. I was interested to some extent because I had actually known Julian Weissman when I was a teenager. I thought, well, this is peculiar. But, anyway, I'm a clipper. I kept clipping articles, and the story just got crazier and crazier. At the beginning, nobody knew whether they were really fakes, and then it's just everything about the story got crazier and crazier and crazier. So at a certain point, I thought, this is a really interesting idea. And of course, all my filmmaker friends said, it's a great idea. Do not make this film. No one will talk to you. And they were absolutely right. But when Patty Cohn was one of the first people I did the interview, when she came, and the woman at the Times, and then Michael Schneierson did, and then, it just kind of grew and grew, and then the trial happened, and of course we were all disappointed that we all knew it was not going to reach a real end. Because everybody settles,
right,
all the time. So
at which point in your efforts to make the film, so you've been clipping, you've been going forward.
I had been doing research. For
right.
Like
so where was it in the story when you started to talk to Patricia Cohen?
I think it was
film?
June. Yeah, I did an interview with her in June of 2015. By then, I had already spent about 6 months doing extensive research on it because several people were writing about it, but one journalist would have one piece of the story and another would have another one. And so I had sort of accumulated an enormous amount of, but I wasn't going to go on the film and announce this is what happened here. So
right.
It was sort of a way of how do you tell a story with the main characters were obviously not going to speak because most of them were under some kind of legal situation and everybody else was embarrassed. There were a lot of people who toyed with doing it. They'd meet me, they'd buy me a drink. I think I'm going to do the interview, and then they'd run away. So, because they were just embarrassed by any association. They hadn't done anything wrong, but there was a lot of embarrassment.
Right. So you said in the beginning that your friends told you that nobody was going to talk to you, but that's one of the great strengths of the film is that you have so many sources, so both not only the media outlets, but then the lawyers, the attorneys, and some art authenticators or authorities.
I was relentless. But
you were relentless.
There were people
that helps. That obviously helps. Right. But so the story develops, and with those media sources, did you have to twist a lot of arms in that case, or because there is a lot of coverage of the art world, as we all know, and so you have Art News, you have the Times, you have all the different sources that you had. So putting it together. Where did you go first to media people? Did you go a blanket everybody? You were going to attorneys and media people and the other sources that you could?
No, the first people I went to were the journalists because they were the people who had the facts. They were the ones who had been covering it. They had really done the initial investigative journalism. Some would drop out after a while, but that's who I approached first. Then I started, the trial actually created a whole new batch of people because I attended every single second. In fact, in some of those drawings, I'm in them. So at the trial, I would the witnesses, like Martha Parrish, who I think is like she's the moral center of the film.
Yeah.
And I didn't so much meet her there, but I liked her there. And then I had already done an interview with the lawyers for the Desolés. But I had done it, I had met with them before the trial, but I actually did the interview afterwards, and I got them to get me in touch with them. So it was, it took a lot of running after people, and there were very interesting people, like, I don't think he would mind me mentioning this. Let me think about whether he'd mind me. I know. Like David Anfam was an interesting character in the trial. I don't know how much of it comes across because he really had been manipulated. He's a big Rothko expert, but he had been manipulated, you give somebody a certain amount of information. Nevertheless, it is still embarrassing to be in it. So in a way, he would, he'd meet with me whenever he came to New York, and he'd say, I love it that you're doing this film. I don't know whether I can be in this film. And then ultimately and there were things going on in his life, but he came to the premiere screening in London, and actually at the QandA, I met him, and he said, I really should have done the interview. But he liked the film.
Where did you screen it in London? You screened it at the Tate?
At the
or
Rain
someplace?
Dance Film Festival.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right. So that's
and
good.
he lives there, so.
So, and it is interesting because what everybody gets at, I mean, in addition to the moral center, which I think is true, is the aspect of the embarrassment and is the embarrassment in terms of the people that have bought the paintings, it's in terms of the people that have authenticated or have viewed the paintings, and that's taken to mean they've authenticated them and so forth. But one question that comes to me is, in all of this, we're talking about the business. I mean, there's only the forgeries because of the ability to make money. And we all know, or there's many debates about art as commodity and where's the art appreciation. So that we have these masters. You're not going to forge ones that don't fetch a lot of money, right? So it's not just because I happen to like abstract painting, it's because I happen to like the ones that cost the most money. But nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about the appreciation aspect in any of this. They talk about,
Well, this particular story, I mean, there have been other documentaries made which talk about how it's all just the price, like the price of everything talks about how, and I think anybody who reads anything in the news these days knows that it has almost nothing to do with art. I won't say it has nothing to do with art. But this really was, the focus of this was not about, do you really like the art? I think there were collectors. I think there are collectors who believe they like the art. Let me just say this about that. The Desolés certainly had become avid art collectors. I mean, especially Mrs. Desolé. On the other hand, if you're going to buy a Rothko and think it's the most fabulous Rothko you've ever seen, and it's being treated with kid gloves, and it's in Freeports, and it ends up in museums in Europe. But the moment that it became a fake, that painting was treated like a piece of garbage in the courtroom, which all the journalists and myself, we couldn't help noticing it. There were no white gloves, and they would schlep it across, depending on who was the same. So, I'm sure a year before that it had been. I don't know how they feel exactly about that painting, but, to me, if you like the painting, you should still like the painting.
Well, that's what I think. And that was interesting that when someone was commenting about how someone might tell the story, well, I have one of the last fakes from
there's that market as well.
The gallery, and so that's
right.
its own story. Is that worth a couple of $1 million that you paid for the painting? I'm not sure, but that's not my pay grade.
I think also there were a lot of collectors, especially early on. Not all of the paintings went for millions of dollars. So if you bought something early, if you bought a Diebenkorn, drawing, I don't know exactly what the earliest ones went for. It's not worth it to have a lawsuit. So a lot of people actually didn't have lawsuits. And what exactly they will do with their, I don't know the name of the collector, but I know through someone else. I know there's a Diebenkorn fake sitting in a collector's, and why not? He can't get rid of it. He probably likes it, and, they are around. I don't know how many
Two
are
things.
around.
One, did you know when you were making the film that it was such a comedy? Because there was so much laughter in the room at some of the things that people said.
To me it was, but this is a good, they laugh in the right place.
It was hysterical. It was hysterical. But to that point, as things were pointed out about the misspelling of the signature, and then did he know that he was forging? Well, he signed the names to it, so that kind of says forgery is about signing names, right? So. But
everybody's delusional in one way or another. Like, I didn't set out to make a film that was like a total condemnation of, I want the audience to decide what they think about. It wasn't, I wanted the lawyers to play against each other. That's why I gave Anne's lawyer so much time, because actually it's kind of dull to just decide before you start making a film who's exactly guilty of what. It's like,
No, but I mean, but Ann's lawyer was very circumspect. He walked a line where he was not going to, pull the punches 100%. So, but the question remains that after all these things are pointed out about what's the provenance, and there is no provenance, there's no sign of any sale, and so forth. So if I try to sell that painting again, if I'm going to recirculate that painting, now everybody knows that there's,
But everybody
is
doesn't
anybody
know.
going to look for the provenance
No.
the next time
The people in
out?
this audience now know more about the Knoedler story than almost anybody in the world knows. Because I'm not kidding, you actually do. Because what happened with the Knoedler story is people who were interested certainly read articles as they were developing. But if you read an article, you would see that's weird, and like Patty would write an article, or Schneierson would write, or it was only if you actually attended the trial or see this film now, because it gets into those things. Because I think a lot of people know that something fishy went on, but they don't know every little move, that they don't know about the switch from the Osorio bullshit
stories here, right?
provenance to the David Herbert bullshit. I mean, it's not something that is in the articles.
No, it's true, it's not. But there are the points that were made about collectors at that level of money and that level of mastery these are the questions you always have to ask, right?
Yes.
And none of these questions seems to have been asked. You know what I mean? There weren't checkpoints. So if I'm going to buy this painting that's now it's being circulated, I don't know it's a forgery. It's not. I didn't read the Knoedler story. I don't know anything about it. But if I'm going to spend $17 million, I'm going to probably ask those questions. I mean, I think a knowledgeable collector probably would. Yes? No?
Well, part of it was that the Knoedler provenance, it was such a respected, nobody thought that Anne Friedman and Knoedler, there was an interesting, it's not in the film, but there was an interesting moment during the trial where Jack Flam is on the stand, and they would say, he would visit Knoedler a lot. He was an art guy. He'd stop by the gallery and sit there, and sometimes there would be one of these paintings, but they'd be sitting on an easel, or they'd be like, against the wall. And, he might have looked over and said, gee, that's nice, where'd you get it? But it wasn't that these people were actually authenticating, but it got turned around on them, I think. And I think that's what came out at the trial, that everybody was a little misused that way. But nobody really would have suspected. Why would you suspect that this prestigious gallery is going to be involved in,
Right.
In this?
So I won't try to sell mine. Then that's
Oh, really?
fine. Yeah. One other thing I wanted to say, and then I wanted to get to the audience, is there was one sense of the creative juice in there, which I loved, which was the Chinese artist who said that he's going to forge these things, but he's forging expressionist paintings. You have to put your spirit into it. And it's like, yeah, that's true, but that's not what this is about. But you could feel that he felt that.
He absolutely felt that. Well, he's a painter himself.
Exactly.
Exactly.
I mean, we got a much stronger dose of the art scene in
Yes.
there, the artist's work in there,
Right.
than the rest of the commodity aspect.
Yeah.
Is it true that Helen Harrison's in the house?
There she is. And
There she is.
I want to thank Helen for being one of the best people in helping to provide photographs. No nonsense, not like the foundations, not like the rest. So she did. I'd also like to thank some of the artists in the audience who
Nathan Slade
contributed their
Joseph,
background.
yeah.
Nathan, Joseph contributed some of the art in the background.
He says
You
he
what?
faked it.
Yeah. No, I actually faked it after you gave it to me.
There used to be a gallery in New York that sold Buckeyes. You know what Buckeyes were?
They sound familiar.
Things were made for a buck. And there used to be like Chinese factories. They just they cut the brushes, one for a leaf, one for a flower. And they're going to produce all of them. They look Italian, and they would sign in a bill, Ruggiero,
Yeah.
or some famous, Michelangelo, but misspelled. And they used to sell about $450, $200 with the frame. Well, some of them weren't.
Right.
So it wasn't unusual for Chinese industry or Bangladesh to kind of reproduce all those for hotels and stuff. So it looks Italian, floral, and stuff like that. And we call them Buckeyes, and the guy was making a fortune.
Spiro, I did want to ask, Helen, if you don't mind, I'd just like to ask you one question, which is, they talk about how Paula Krasner stopped authenticating. And I know that from the times when I was at the press and so forth, that these situations that come up all the time. Is this a real Pollock? Is this a real Pollock? Is the reason for not authenticating anymore is that it gets too wrapped up in the legal issues?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
One of the, now remember, the Pollock-Krasner House is not the Pollock-Krasner Foundation.
Right, right.
The foundation were they established the authentication board after Lee Krasner's death, but there was a previous board when she was alive. And of course, she was the final say, but she was smart enough to surround herself with experts so it wouldn't seem like she was self-dealing. And when she was alive, it was very difficult to question these things because Lee was the final say. But after her death, when it was just the experts, people would bring their work in for the catalog raisonné supplement, which was being produced. And if the committee didn't like it, they wouldn't say it was fake. Because as you pointed out, if it's not signed, it isn't being made to deceive. It's possibly just a homage or just somebody painting, as Adam Gopnik said, you know, a posthumous assistant, a follower, whatever. But they would just say, no, we won't include it. 3 times they were taken to court for that. Even though the people who had brought the paintings in had signed a disclaimer saying we will accept whatever the committee decides. It didn't matter. Right. And the 3rd time after that, it was 3 strikes and we are out of here.
And then a lot of other foundations, like Andy Warhol won't.
Most
of them won't.
Well, and Luke Nickish is actually the attorney for the Warhol Foundation. So Lichtenstein, you know, they all got out of the business, Frankenthaler, Motherwell, because of the legal issues. Right. And there is no way to prevent somebody coming to you. In fact, I don't want to take up a lot of time, but there's a very interesting case recently. IFAR, you mentioned, the International Foundation for Art Research.
Right, IFAR.
Years ago, a painting was brought to the Pollock-Krasner Foundation for authentication that was the 3rd lawsuit, the one that broke their back. And this painting was totally bogus. There was no question about it. Years later, the same owner takes it back to IFAR. They have a 2-step process. First, they'll look at it and say, yeah, okay, we'll take it. Then they do the authentication. They didn't even want to touch it because this thing was so burned. He sued them for not looking at it.
Right. That's what I heard in lots of interviews I did, and why experts, this whole sort of concept of experts. Whereas in this story, the experts were misused. But as Schneierson says, she knew better than to actually say, will you authenticate?
Well, that happened to me. I was there researching a Conrad Marcarelli exhibition. I had nothing to do with Pollock or anything. And there are these 2 paintings, you know, sitting on easels. And as we're walking out, she says, what do you think of this? You know,
exactly. That was the
those
line.
Are paintings, I said.
You mean you didn't say they're very interesting?
I didn't say how interesting they were. They were bogus, and I could tell. Right. But the point was that, you know, she was fishing.
Yeah.
But she could legitimately say that I had seen them.
That's right.
Even if I'd said they were crap, I still would have seen them.
Yes, they were viewed.
They were viewed, exactly.
Well,
and
thank
since
you
the
all.
other experts won't,
right?
You know,
Exactly. So it just shows that if you take a lot of money and add lawyers, you're going to have a lot of fun. So thanks a lot for a wonderful film, and thank you all for coming and staying for this.